Hey everyone, I'm John Carter, and this is the Boca Voice. The City Council recently came to an agreement with the Beach and Parks District for the Beach and Parks District to acquire the Ocean Breeze golf course from Lennar for a bid of $24 million. The City Council and the Beach and Parks District held a joint meeting discussing some details about the project and had a lot of public comment. Don Huber joins me today, and his public comment was very interesting. He has a very different perspective than most people on the golf deal, and he's the chairman of the Ocean Breeze Golf and Tennis Neighborhood Association. So, Don, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, John.
So tell me a little bit about the history between the Ocean Breeze property and what's going on. Why is it currently in this limbo?
In 1974, I believe is the year, 42 years ago, the developers of the Ocean Breeze area, which at that time was called Boca Raton, put a covenant in the deed for the golf course property. It's 202 acres and it's 27 holes of golf and tennis with a hotel and a clubhouse. They put a covenant in the deed, a restrictive deed covenant. And what that means, having taught real estate law and real estate finance at one time, I can speak with a little bit of a degree of expertise. That covenant means it must, in perpetuity, be a golf course. No matter who acquires it or how they acquire it, that property must always be maintained as a golf course. In 2008, the financial crisis in this country forced a lot of banks to come to the table for the movie Too Big to Fail. If you saw that, Richard Kovacevic, the chairman of Wells Fargo at that time, said to Paulson, "Why did I have to drag my here from California? Why did I have to do that? We're not in trouble. We don't need your help." And they said, "We need the good banks and the bad banks to camouflage who's in trouble." Wells Fargo ended up having to acquire Wachovia Bank. In acquiring that, they acquired a lot of headaches, a lot of problems. A lot of the news you've heard over the last 5 years about Wells Fargo having lawsuits in the hundreds of millions of dollars, there have been 4 or 5 of them in the $500 million category, have been in things they've inherited from the Wachovia culture. Wells Fargo is a good institution, they do a good job, but they've had problems because of the Wachovia history. They acquired a mortgage at that time, which was a $6.9 million mortgage Wachovia had on this golf course, but it was in default. By early 2009 or early 2010, it was foreclosed by Wells Fargo. The foreclosure sat in limbo for 6.5 years under the direction of a court receiver, and they brought in 2010, they had Arnold Palmer Management, a golf management company, come in to run the course so as not to violate the covenant closing the course when it had to be maintained as a golf course. The long and the short of that story is when they did that, they ran the course until approximately November of 2015. At that time, Wells Fargo said to the court receiver, "Okay, it's been pending long enough, we want our judgment." They took a judgment. The $6.9 million mortgage was now a judgment of $17.9 million in delinquencies and default fees, legal fees. Then, in the month of December of 2015, they asked the court receiver and the court, "Please liquidate the assets of the defendant to satisfy our judgment." The course was put up for sale. It was advertised internationally on the internet. It sold for $4,100,000. The highest bidder, we're led to believe, was $4 million, but Wells Fargo didn't want to deal with them, so they outbid it by $100. So Wells Fargo's real estate division bought the course in a foreclosure sale for $4,100,000. In January of 2016, they took title. Then there were some shenanigans going on, and there was a transfer of the judgment from Wells Fargo Bank to reduce their real estate division. It's now seriously questioned whether they paid $4 million for it or whether they were satisfying a $17.9 million judgment, paying an additional $4 million in cash, which would represent a $21 million purchase. In any case, it's arguable that that foreclosure sale was a fair market value, determining the place was worth $4 million. As a result of all of this, somewhere in the transactions, Lennar Homes came into the picture and they made a proposal to pay off the course. They made a purchase agreement with Wells Fargo. They made a proposal to the city when they realized they couldn't develop it without the homeowners protected by the covenant agreeing. There are 1,700 and some homes and condos in the area covered by this covenant. When they found out they couldn't get the approval to develop anything on the course, they said, we'll make a deal to pay off the purchase with Wells Fargo. We'll deed the course at a value of $10 million to the city, and we'll pay you $41 million additional, and we'll buy the course on Glades Road, the municipal course outside the city limits. When they did that, there was a lot of debate and discussion about value. I argued it was only worth $4 million, and they were trying to take credit for $10 million. Wells Fargo and Lanier have refused to disclose the details of their deal. Lanier's attorney called and asked us to have a meeting. We had a meeting with them. They wanted our help. They said, we're all trying to get the course reopened. I said, yes, we want it reopened, but our mission in the neighborhood association is, number one, get the course reopened, and number two, to get the covenant enforced. And that's part of getting it reopened. Then we also have said we're going to ask the courts to determine what is the value of the loss we've suffered by the course being closed, which is a violation of the covenant. In real estate, a covenant on a deed that's called a restrictive deed covenant protects the adjacent owners in two respects. Number one, you're located on or near a golf course, which increases your value. And number two, you're getting the views and vistas of a nice manicured, landscaped, and well-traversed course by golfers going up and down every day. When they closed the course, they violated both of those conditions. We're going to be asking the courts for a class action judgment, getting an order for the course to be reopened, and to pay the 42 homeowners that are for sale. Currently in the 1,700 homes, 42 are for sale, and they've been told by the realtors since it was closed last June, you have to reduce your price because you're no longer located on a golf course. Even though there's promise of it reopening, they have not done that, and it's under a situation where two owners have said we had to reduce our price by $50,000, and one said we had to reduce our price by $150,000 because our realtor said we can't market it as being located on a golf course from a standpoint of ethical marketing. As a result, the 42 owners have suffered somewhere in the area of $100,000 in losses. That's a $4.2 million judgment, plus legal fees and costs. That's a $5 or $6 million case. Secondly, the 1,660 of us out of 1,700 who have lost the views and vistas, it's worth something. We're prepared to argue to the court that it's worth $25 a day. Because of the several hundred days the course has now been closed, and obviously the city won't take up reopening it until April 24th, nor will the Parks District. That's when they're going to look at it again. It will have been closed close to 300 days, and that'll be worth some $6,000 per homeowner and condo owner. And with 1,660 of us, that's about a $15 million judgment with legal fees and costs. So we're talking a $20 or $30 million lawsuit. If all 1,660 of us have lost a neighborhood golf course, we're going to ask for $100,000 per owner. That's a $250 million lawsuit against Wells Fargo. We're also going to be asking in the next few weeks if Wells Fargo's legal counsel and their attorney, their president, Mr. Sloan, I believe is his name, in San Francisco, will come to Boca and sit down and talk with us like their advertising in the last year has said, in light of all their problems. We're going to do right by the communities in which we do business. We're going to ask them to come and sit down and have a talk with us to try and resolve this short of a full-blown lawsuit. But a lawsuit is being drafted by counsel that we've retained, and we're going to be looking at the possibility of collecting damages for the owners. We're not opposed to the city or Parks District buying it, although we've now learned two things. Wells Fargo has apparently already received, by rumor we've been told, from reliable sources, they've already received $10 million towards satisfying their judgment. That questions the value being as high as is now being stated. If the city was looking at taking it and the Lennar people were willing to sell it for $10 million, now they've switched and they said, we'll do a $24 million sale to the Parks District. I seriously question that value. That's way over what we think that property is worth. The course on the Boca del Mar area sold a couple of years ago here in Boca for $1 million or $1.5 million. It was a little bit smaller, but there's no comparison to $24 million. And they didn't have a deed restrictive covenant, so they could develop that property. We have a deed restrictive covenant, so whoever acquires it must use it as a golf course or get permission from the 1,700 owners to do otherwise. We've also learned that there was a meeting in January of 2015 by a relative of someone on the city council with Lennar, and we have two witnesses who've reported that, and it was a meeting which involved discussions about the purchase of the course. I question why someone related to somebody on the city council or in the mayor's office would be talking to Lennar in January of 2015 about that course, when the whole deal didn't come to fruition and didn't start to come around to public exposure until November and December of 15 and January of 16. I think there may be something there that the Attorney General should look into from a standpoint of propriety and ethics. If there's a deal cut and there's a family member of a city council person involved, we need to know that. That makes it a highly suspicious transaction.
So, do you know which city council had that discussion, or a family member of that city council?
We know. In fact, the person who reportedly had that discussion walked in late in the meeting last night and sat right in front of me, so I thought it was unique that he was there when I spoke. But we're not in a position to be exposing names. As I said, at this point, it's more than rumor, because we've talked to people who said, we know who witnessed it and who participated in the discussion, and in fact, one of our friends, who is no longer around, reported it to two other people. So we have two witnesses who can corroborate what went on, and that causes us enough suspicion to say we want this looked into. Because if all of a sudden they're selling it to the Parks District for $24 million, when just weeks ago they were willing to trade it off to the city and say it was worth $10 million, and it's strange. Lennar bid on that course, as you probably know, in West Boca, outside the city limits. They bid $51 million, $10 million for this course as a trade-off, and $41 in cash. Now they're saying they're going to raise their bid of $51 to $74 million. Isn't it interesting that that's $23 million of taxpayer dollars that's going to be handed to them for the Ocean Breeze course, allowing them to raise their bid on the municipal course? There's something very strange going on here that we think needs to be looked into, and we're turning it over to Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, to see if that's something she should look into. In addition, the dock stamps that were paid on the sale back in January of last year were for $4 million. If, as one of Lennar's attorneys has now said, no, that was a trade-off of a satisfaction of a $17 million judgment and a $4 million cash, that sounds like a $21 million sale, and the dock stamps would be $151,000, not $28,000 that were paid.
So, if you and your colleagues had, in a perfect world, what would be your ideal solution to making sure that golf stays in Boca Raton and that we get the best possible deal in our for the Western Golf Course?
The golf staying in Boca Raton is going to happen. I have no doubt about that. And it will probably be the Parks District. We're not opposed to that, but we are opposed to the terms of the deal, the price of the deal, and the possible political finagling that's been going on with people involved that may be getting some kind of a kickback. We don't know that. It's only suspicion, it's only rumor, but we want somebody with authority to look at this and tell us, especially since there's an election coming up. As you know, your organization and the Boca Watch organization have been producing comments about the status of the city and the traffic and the heavy congestion. We're very concerned, and I'm personally, I haven't made up my mind, but I'm not voting for any incumbents, I'll tell you that. I'm very disturbed. I've been here 20 years, and we've had family. My wife and I have had family in Boca for over 50 years. So we're very concerned about the way the town has gone. It's becoming a small New York City, and that's too crowded. It's not the quaint little community it was 50, 60 years ago.
Understandable. A lot of people my age actually enjoy what's going on because we think that Boca Raton's become more inclusive over the years because, smaller communities are very hard to thrive in. But I understand someone, living here in Boca Raton, you came here for a quiet life and you didn't want to see FAU become this big booming university and all these jobs come in, and that's understandable. So back to the Ocean Breeze, what is the ideal price that should be negotiated between the Beach and Parks District and the Lennar company?
First of all, before I answer that question, your comment about FAU, I'm not opposed to FAU coming here. In fact, I've enjoyed our kids flew kites here many times in the winter when we visited years ago on the airport runways that are now FAU's campus. No, I like FAU being here, by the way. And the price that you're raising a question about, obviously the sale on the internet was a $4 million sale just a little over a year ago, 13 months ago. That's arguably a fair market value. On the other hand, they've claimed a $10 million, and they've also said their deal with Wells Fargo is for a lot more than $10 million. Well, they refused to disclose. When they asked for our help to cooperate to get this to become a city-owned course, I said, we're in agreement with you. That could happen and probably should happen, but will you tell us what your terms are with Wells Fargo? They said, no, that's confidential. Well, let me ask you a question. If you agree to a deal with the city or the Parks District, but down the road, your purchase of the other course is stymied by the county, who have to approve any rezonings because the other course is out county. If it all falls apart later, what are your alternatives? What are your plans? We can't tell you. That's confidential. You want our help, but you won't tell us what your alternative plans are in the case this doesn't happen. I think the course is worth $4 million. The tax assessor puts it at something like 3.6 or 4 million. There have been 2 appraisals that the Parks District has ignored, and that scares me. As an elected government agency, there are 2 appraisals out there, one by Dellenbach and Whitney here in town, a very respected appraisal firm in the area of $3 or $4 million, and a professional golf management and golf sales organization that have sold over $15 billion in golf courses over the last decade did an appraisal on this course recently, and they said it's worth about $5 million. But as I say, the tax assessors put it in the $3, $4, or $5 million bracket. So it's definitely not worth 10, and it's definitely not worth 24 million. And it scares me that our tax dollars are being thrown at them so they can raise their price on the Western course. And when Mr. Koski for the Parks District said at a recent meeting, no one should think this has anything to do with the Western course. Well, if they raise their price to 74 million, that extra 23 or 24 million coming from the Parks District, if that's how it works, that smells. That's a political situation that I think needs to be looked into very thoroughly. I would say probably in the $4 or $5 or $6 million category is the price that your question deserves for an answer.
Well, excellent. Thanks for coming on today. You know, it's a very interesting perspective hearing, and I wish, you know, I think what we all want at the end of the day is the best deal for our tax dollars. You know, no one wants to spend more than we have to, and we all want golf in Boca Raton. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective. And what do you think? Should we have golf in Boca Raton? And what is the ideal price you would like to see paid for the Ocean Breeze Golf Course by the Beach and Parks District? Let us know in the comment section below. Until next time, I'm John Carter, your voice for all things politics.